Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to today's Public Subsidy Board meeting. I am New York State Department of Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon, and I'm also the board chair for this board. I want to say thank you to my fellow board members for joining me today. Quorum has been established. I appreciate your continued dedication to this board. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone about a few important ground rules. For those joining us remotely via Zoom, you've been muted upon entry and will remain muted throughout today's meeting. There will be no public testimony during this meeting, and any distracting video will be disabled. Members are joining this meeting from two physical locations connected by video conferencing in Albany and in New York City. Today's meeting is an open public meeting, and it is being recorded. The recordings and other details of the board's work are available on the Department of Labor website. Now, I'd like to give my fellow board members the opportunity to introduce themselves, beginning with the members who are here with me in Albany, followed by the board members situated in our Church Street location in New York City. And let's start today with Al Catalano in Albany.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner. So Al Catalano, Secretary-Treasurer of the New York State Building and Construction Trades Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. Stephen Tucker, President and CEO of Northern Workforce Training Center in Buffalo, New York.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chris Lund, retired New York State DOL.
And good morning, Sean McCready, current Director of Public Work and Secretary to the Board.
Thank you. And in New York?
Good morning, Commissioner, fellow board members. Gary LaBarbera, President of the New York City Building and Construction Trades Council.
Good morning, Hope Knight, President and CEO of Empire State Development.
Good morning, Jim Whalen, President of the Real Estate Board of New York.
Thank you so much. We are also joined today by members of the department's counsel's office who will be here to provide us guidance if we need a legal perspective at any point during today's meeting. Now, as we conduct our business, we must keep in mind that we are subject to the open meetings law. So through this board, we are conducting open public meetings. If any board members have any written material that they would like to submit for the board's review or consideration, I ask that they please submit these materials at least 24 hours in advance so that other members of this body can review the material before we meet, and so we can share such materials with the public as necessary. Today's meeting is to continue our work towards adopting procedures related to identifying projects potentially covered by Labor Law Section 224A and holding confidential hearings. Previously, we directed Board Secretary Sean McCready to develop a process for how these hearings and proceedings will operate. Since our last meeting, members of the board were provided with the proposed procedures in writing, and some members submitted comments. Thank you all for your thoughtful feedback. Because there were some overlapping comments from board members, we've combined the comments into one document and shared them with the members of the board in advance of today's meeting. Today, we will go through compressed version to discuss how the comments fit into the big picture of our procedures. Generally speaking, the challenge we are grappling with as we finalize our processes is that this board is new and unlike others that you may also sit on. This board has a unique role outlined in Labor Law Section 224C, which is the statute that created this board, and the underlying substance in Labor Law 224A, which is the law connecting prevailing wage requirements to private contracts funded in part by public subsidies. Our processes need to be rooted in both laws, and we need to keep that in mind today. In reviewing the comments, I noticed quite a few of the comments focused on establishing deadlines for certain functions. While I believe that we all understand the importance of working efficiently, I also want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up to succeed. This board is still in its infancy, and deadlines with short turnaround times might hinder our efforts or even undermine this board's authority by putting us at risk for litigation. I fully support efficiency as it is important to the stakeholders. This is the first time that we're doing this, so I want efficiency to be the ally of effectiveness. As you all know, we need quorum, and it is required by law to do our business. I also want to be conscious of our own time commitments to the board during this process. We not only need quorums to conduct business, but we need quorums that comply with the open meetings law, meaning mostly in-person meetings with almost all of us attending. I'll point these concerns out more specifically as we discuss the proposed revisions. I know that there are a few outstanding questions about the open meetings law. We will address those at our next meeting in September. I want all board members to know that if you have specific questions, Sean is ready to assist you as board secretary. Okay, let's get started. Let's discuss section by section. Now, as we go through each of the revised recommended procedures, Sean will provide a summary of the proposed procedure and board comments, and then we'll have open discussion. During our discussion, Sean will note any additional comments. My goal for us is that we leave today's meeting with final procedures in place. This board has the ability to have a consensus on what the final motions will be on each procedure, and I believe in most cases, that is the best and most efficient way to proceed, as we are all on the same page with a lot of what we'll be discussing. We can always vote on individual suggestions as needed, but by voting by consensus, it will help us expedite the process so we can spend more time on the matters that require more discussion. Another reason why I'd like to work through these proposed processes and comments as expeditiously as possible is that we have received a request for determination on a project. We need these processes so we can facilitate our work. Let's begin with our first recommended procedure for identifying potentially covered projects. Sean, please provide a summary.
Thank you. The proposed process to identify potentially covered projects. Section 1. Request for a determination as to whether a project is a covered project for purposes of Labor Law Section 224A are to be submitted to the Department of Labor's Bureau of Public Work via Form PW39A. There was a proposal suggested by James Whalen that the forms be date and time stamped upon receipt, which is fine. The Bureau of Public have been doing that anyway. Subsection A, if a request for determination is made directly to a board member, they are to refer the requester to the Bureau of Public Work. Within 10 days of the Bureau of Public Work receiving a request for determination, the Secretary shall notify the board of the existence of a potentially covered project. There was another proposal by James Whalen to shorten this within 5 days, which again, I don't have an objection to as the Director of Public Work of the Secretary. 3, Bureau of Public Work conducts preliminary research and fact-finding to gather information regarding the project cost, type and amount of the subsidies involved, location and nature of the project, identity of the owner developers, and any contractors or subcontractors involved, any past history of Bureau of Public Work, and any involved parties and other relevant information. There was some suggested edits, again by James Whalen. I'll just read the entirety of the alternate version of paragraph 3. An alternate version of paragraph 3 to consider would be Bureau of Public Work conducts preliminary research and fact-finding to gather data-driven, objective information, including the project cost, the type and amount of the public funds provided by a public entity, the location and nature of the project, the identity and corporate form of the owner developers of the project, whether there's a pre-hire collective bargaining agreement, labor peace agreement, project labor agreement, or other enforceable labor agreement in place, the identity of the determination requester, any past history of Bureau of Public Work, and other relevant information needed to determine whether the project may be covered by Labor Law Section 224A. If we can discuss and consider, but if the Bureau of Public Work has no objection to that language.
Well, I do have a question on that. I'm not sure why we want to remove contractors, subcontractors.
I speak, yeah, Gary, just at the end of the day, I mean, our view is it's the owner developer who is ultimately accountable, right? I mean, the contractor is just merely working for the owner.
Right, but I think the certified payroll is the responsibility of the contractors. So if the contract is known, you should know who the contractor should be in the loop, because they do have a responsibility to maintain the certified payroll.
I wouldn't hold this up over this. Okay?
Yeah, you know, and that's the only
Right.
issue. Okay, so we just need contractors in.
The basic thrust of the proposed
I
change
get what you're
shows that
saying.
it more closely tracks the statute.
Right.
But it's
Yeah,
one more entity being notified. Fine.
okay, thank you.
So I think, unless I hear any other objections, what we're agreeing to is the contractor stays in.
Right. And, you know, my sense is this comes up several times, so why don't we just.
Yeah, it's gonna come up a few times.
Yeah. That's all. That was the only reason why it was the certified payroll.
Stephen has asked about subcontractor. Is that
The
also?
contractor and subcontractor, or just the direct contractor?
I think it should be both.
Oh,
So that's why essentially the Bureau could notify all known contractors.
Yeah,
I mean, if you don't know about somebody on the project, you have to notify them, but again, the law doesn't specifically require the notice to go to the contractor, but it was more of a, in the interest of transparency, trying to get as much notice out as possible. That's why it was suggested, if you want to leave it in, yeah, we can send notice to any contractors we know of being on the
If they're known, right?
primary or sub.
Who ultimately is responsible for the certified payroll.
right. Okay, so we agree to that, so contractor, subcontractors in, perfect, thank you. Continue?
So, section 4, within 45 days of Bureau of Public Work receiving a request for termination, the board secretary shall deliver to the board a report containing the submission form, Bureau of Public Works preliminary findings, recommendations for any additional information relevant to obtain before making a final termination, and assessment by the Bureau of Public Work of the applicability of Labor Law 224A. There was a proposal by James Wayman to shorten this to 30 days. The Bureau can absolutely submit a report to the board within 30 days. The only drawback is if it's a situation where anything had to be subpoenaed, it might not be there in time. And we can always follow it up with a subsequent report before the hearing or meeting is actually held, but that would be the drawback there. So we could shorten to 30 if that's what the board wants to do. Subpoenas could go out with 2 or 3 week response time. If they go out right away, potentially get the stuff back. It may be irrelevant in many cases if we're not waiting on materials, and if something doesn't come in within 30, again, there's the process we'll get to later where it could be continuation, or there'll be more time before the actual meeting to get documents. So we can consider a lot to read verbally.
Right.
Section 5, owners, developers.
So wait a minute, so
Okay.
is everybody okay with 30? Understanding that it may we may have a lag. So if
Yes.
by consensus, it's 30. Okay.
Any owners, developers, public entities having provided public subsidies, and contractors known to have an interest in the project shall be notified within 5 days of report being delivered to the board that the project is under review. There was an alternate section proposed by James Wayland that would read, any owners, developers, and public entities having provided or that may provide public subsidies shall be notified of the request for the determination at the same time that the board is notified in paragraph 2 above, and may respond in writing for the board's consideration within 40 days. So one of the changes there was to take out contractors, which I believe we
Correction.
can.
That's done.
Notifying at the same time, it doesn't matter to me as secretary. I can send out notice at the same time. It was more of just giving it a couple days lead time to make sure the board was fully apprised before notices went out to others. Again, it's entirely up to the board. And then we have one other thing allowing for a response in writing, which again, I believe we could probably do anyway and send something for your consideration. You can be notified of it.
So is there any discussion on this particular point, or we agree with the change?
That's no problem.
Okay, excellent. Adopted.
Section 6, at a meeting of the board during an executive session to maintain confidentiality required by Labor Law 224C, as discussion relates to a specific project or individual, the board members vote as to whether they wish to issue determination, not issue determination, or conduct additional fact-finding. It was proposed by James Wayland that the board should meet within 30 days of receipt of a report submitted by Bureau of Public Work. Again, entirely up to the board. It's a commitment to making sure the board meets within that 30 days. So that's just the only part to consider there.
Well, let me point out again that we're operating under open meeting laws, so that means we have to have a quorum. That means we almost all of us have to be present at this point in a physical location, because at this point we can't do any other locations. So this is putting some stress on the board to be available within that time frame, correct?
Correct. Again, the meetings can always be held that quickly if possible. This would just be putting a hard constraint on it.
So
So what's the purpose of that hard constraint though? Because I think it would cause some difficulty with scheduling potentially.
the scheduling is difficult, yes.
It'll add more difficulty.
It'll make it more difficult.
The problem is you can't have an open-ended process, right? I mean, this board, the decisions it's going to be a red light, green light about whether projects proceed, whether people get employed, Jobs are created, economic activity, so it can't be open-ended.
Well, first of all, it's not open-ended. We have a quarterly meeting at least, and we would schedule these as quickly as we can. I think the problem is saying 30 days really boxes us in.
Could you meet in the middle and say within 30 days, if possible or reasonably thereafter?
Would that be acceptable? I mean, we want to expedite this. Nobody wants to.
Well, that's the point. I mean, I happen to agree with Jim. It shouldn't just be open-ended in 3 months because, owners, developers, contractors have to know. So now we say, be within 30 days if possible or reasonably thereafter.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so let's make it that reasonably thereafter and,
And also, just to move this along, we're dropping the next two proposals. One is the contractor and the other is removing or individual.
okay, great. If there's no objection to that, so that's dropped. C,
I can actually, well, we start at exponential. So subsection A would be if the majority of the board issues a determination without conducting additional fact finding, and within 5 days, the secretary shall notify the owners, developers, public entities, and contractors of the board's determination.
he's dropped the contractors.
Right. There was another proposal, though, to make it relevant public entities, which I guess would invite the question of what does relevant get defined as?
Does anybody have any thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, it would have to be relevant. We're not going to tell every public entity in the state of New York, but
I mean, we could mirror the other language of public entities that have or may submit, or provide public funding. So it mirrors the language in the other sections and it narrows it down to those entities that are connected to the project. Would that be acceptable?
That's fine.
good. Okay, wonderful.
Subsection B, if the majority of the board elects to conduct a fact-finding hearing, then the chair may call for a confidential hearing about the specific project or individual. The board members will provide their availability, and the chair shall set a hearing date within 30 days, make requests for documentation and testimony to be secured for the hearing. C, if the majority of the board declines to issue determination, then within 5 days, the secretary shall notify the owners and developers, public entities, which we can also make that have or may provide subsidies, and contractors. Bureau of Public Works shall provide written notice of whether Labor Law 224A shall be enforced, predicated upon the information known at the time, and subject to any determination the board may choose to issue in the future, should new information be discovered. There were two proposals to drop this section entirely and not leave an option for the board to decline to make a determination. Again, the board doesn't ever have to take this route, but I personally believe it has to be planned for. Part and parcel of the proposed subsection D, I'll read in a moment. There could be a circumstance that's not anticipated right now where that may happen, and if we don't have a process in place for it, we're in trouble. If we do have a process and never needs to be used, then it doesn't really matter.
Well, I just want to point out, again, we have two different laws that are governing this board. So 224A is the public subsidy law, and that exists separately from this board. And the fiscal officer in that law has jurisdiction and enforcement authority by default. That I'm the fiscal officer. The labor law 224A also says the board may render a determination. It does not say shall. I'm the fiscal officer under 224A7. Somebody's calling. The board has a role, but nowhere does the law state that the board declining to act means that a project is automatically not covered in the act.
Hello?
What is this?
Let's hang on a sec.
Hold, please.
Okay. Okay, we should be good.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. In the absence of a board or board decision, the law would default to the fiscal officer. So there are two, I mean, this is actually the way that we were interpreting this law before the board was fully sat. So that's just an explanation of what happens should there be no determination. We don't see a circumstance when there would be no determination, but in case there is, that's the path.
So should the procedures say that if there's no determination of defaults to the fiscal officer?
Unless there's a legal reason not to, I think we could add that.
We can, yes.
I mean, it's in the law, but yes. To be clear? Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Jim.
So the subsection D, Ed's proposal in response to a concern James Whalen raised about a deadlock or other reasons why the board might not come to a decision. Proposal would be, if a majority decision of the board cannot be reached due to a failure to make a quorum for voting, abstentions, or any other unforeseen circumstances, then within 5 days, the secretary shall notify the owners and developers, public entities, and contractors of the board's inability to render a determination. Bureau of Public Works will provide a written notice of whether Labor Law 224A shall be enforced, predicated upon the information known at the time, and subject to any determination the board may choose to issue once it is again able to reach a majority decision, which I believe addresses the point we just raised about it defaulting. And then there was a proposed addition by Peter Flory to state that if Bureau of Public Works fails to deliver a report to the board regarding a request for determination within an unspecified number of days, and or the board fails to issue determination to hold a fact-finding hearing within an unspecified number of days, then the project in question should be deemed not covered. If the reasons that commissioners laid out and how the law is written, I don't believe that this section could be added.
Right, I don't think
If
so.
the defaults are not covered, it would default to the fiscal officer rendering the decision absent the board weighing in.
Right.
And that's in the statute.
That's in the law, yeah. It's 224A.
That's the conclusion of the first process on identifying the possible project.
Okay.
But I think for the most part, we were in agreement. Some of the changes were dropped, others were agreed to. Contractors staying in, making consistent language on public entities that have or may provide subsidies. The addition of the possibility of no determination being able to be rendered.
So, thank you. Does everybody understand where we've arrived by consensus? Do you have any other questions or comments on the first process proposal on whether projects are covered under the law? Any other discussion on this? So in that case, I move that we adopt it consistent with our discussions in this meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
So moved.
Thanks. All in favor of the proposed process to identify potentially covered projects? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are those opposed? Abstentions? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. First motion done. All right. So let's move on to our second proposal. Sean will explain the proposed process and comments received on how we hold confidential hearings about a specific project. Sean.
Proposed process for holding a confidential hearing about a specific project. 1. The board is empowered by Labor Law Section 224C, subsection 5, to issue binding determinations to any public entity or any private or not-for-profit owner or developer as to any particular matter related to an existing or potential covered project. The board will consider all relevant documents, testimony, and materials presented during the hearing by any interested sources, which may include the project owner or the Bureau of Public Works. There was a proposal by James Whalen to change interested sources to appropriate sources.
So based on subsequent consultation with DOL staff, and we got educated that interested sources is a term of art in the labor law, we'll withdraw this proposal.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Section 2, hearings addressing a specific project or individual must be confidential pursuant to Labor Law Section 224C2 and 5, with one exception. Publication of board determinations shall be made on the department's website, subject to redaction or confidentiality as the board shall deem warranted, in accordance with any applicable federal or state statutory or regulatory requirement governing confidentiality and personal privacy. 3, once a hearing date is selected, notice of the hearing will be sent by the chair with the assistance of the secretary to the board members, owners and developers, public entities having provided public subsidies or who may provide, and contractors known to have an interest in the project. Again, we withdrew the opposition to adding contractors. Subsection A, any requests for testimony or documents shall be issued by the chair on behalf of the board. The secretary will assist the chair in drafting such requests. B, the Bureau of Public Work will prepare an updated report with any additional information that has been gathered. And there was a proposal by James Whalen to add, and shall distribute such report to the board prior to such hearing. If no opposition to adding that language, it's what I would have done with it anyway, but it makes sense. Section 4, the confidential hearing will be conducted as follows. A, the secretary will read the project details of the Bureau of Public Work report into the record and provide and introduce copies of any documentation to the board and record. The chair will then call witnesses that are present to testify, including a representative from the specific project, such as the owner or developer. The chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to question each witness. After all the questioning is complete, the chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to make a statement regarding their conclusions. The chair will then call for a vote to determine if the board is ready to proceed with issuing a determination or to conduct additional fact-finding. A majority of the board votes for additional fact-finding, then each member may make requests for additional records or testimony to be requested prior to the continuation of the hearing scheduled for a later date. There was one proposal by James Whalen to hold the continuation within 15 days, and there's a proposal by Gary LaBarbera to establish a limit of 1 continuation for the fact-finding hearing, and then cutting off holding a vote after that. My only comments, again, would be the same regarding time constraints. We can do it. The board should be mindful of what they're committing to. And as for the limiting it to 1 fact-finding continuation, the expediency and efficiency of it is nice. However, the one caveat I would mention is if for some reason there's an issue with the first continuation hearing, it gets cut short, or for whatever reason it doesn't get to all of the issues or questions board members have, and the board has cut itself off from the ability to hold another continuation, there is potential of opening it up to litigation challenging whatever determination comes out of that hearing.
I understand. My only purpose of that was that, again, very similar to James Whalen's point, I just don't think we should have open-ended processes. So I don't know if there's a way you guys can come up with something from legal. But I just don't want these things to go on indefinitely.
Yeah,
We agree.
What if the board is given the option to
extend.
to do another one with a majority vote of the board, to do another continuation?
So basically you're saying a limit of 1 continuation for fact finding with a vote. The board, however, may require by a unanimous vote of the board, majority vote of the board could extend to a second inquiry because you.
That works for me. I just think we should have some sort of process that prevents it from just being open-ended. So
Right,
that's what I think.
Regarding the 15 days, do we want to add the language that we used before or reasonable thereafter?
That would have been my suggestion if
Yeah.
we want to stick to it. If we want to put a number there to add that language of, if possible, or if not, then within a reasonable time period.
Thereafter.
You don't want to get yourself hung up on the time, but we do want to expedite this. Okay.
Majority of the board votes for issuing a final determination, and a second vote will be held for the members to vote for the project being covered or not covered by Labor Law 224A. The final determination will be decided by majority vote. Once the board makes the final determination, the secretary shall draft a written determination to issue to the owners and developers, public entities having provided public subsidies or who may provide public subsidies, and contractors known to have an interest, and posted on the department's website, subject to any necessary redactions required by the law.
So remove Jim's removal of keep contractors in.
And those are proposed by James Whalen that the Final determinations, owners, developers, and entities be provided within 5 days of the determination. I have no objection to that as the Secretary or Director of Public Work, if that's what the board wants.
Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right.
Any immediate inquiries made to a board member shall be directed to the chair. There was a question by James Whalen whether or not this belongs here in the processes or should be in the bylaws. It's something we actually could address as a separate resolution if the board wants as well, if it doesn't feel that this is the most appropriate place for it.
We could do a separate resolution if the board wants to do that. I'm fine with that. Is that what people would like to do?
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I think that's very
Yeah.
smart.
Yep, okay, so we'll do a separate resolution on that.
That's the end of the second set of procedures.
Look at us. I guess you can't say cooking with gas anymore. I guess we're cooking with induction cooktop.
All right. So the summary of the substance changes that we discussed would be adding the or may provide subsidies language to when referring to the public entities, distributing the report to the board language, the if possible within a reasonable time thereafter language for holding the hearing within 15 days. Allowing for the board to vote to extend if necessary for an additional continuation. And notes going to the owners and developers within 5 days of the determination.
And then the media, if you're gonna do a separate, yes.
Yes.
Okay, do any of the board members have any additional questions or comments?
I just have, Commissioner, I just have one additional comment, which doesn't speak to the procedures at all. At the beginning of the meeting, you suggested using the September meeting to brief members of the board about the open meeting law. I'd also suggest covering the public officer law as well, just in terms of conflicts of interest and confidentiality matters, just so we're all on the same page.
All right, and we may decide to send you some written material in advance so you can look at it, because it's.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Okay, we have reviewed and discussed this proposal. I move that we adopt it consistent with our discussion in this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Abstentions? Excellent, unanimous again. Okay, now for our third discussion, board members also provided comments regarding our third process for holding a public hearing about a broadly applicable recommendation. I want to note we did vote to approve this procedure at our last meeting, so let's walk through the comments, and if we choose, we can vote to reopen and amend. Sean, please provide a summary of the procedure and the board's submitted comments.
So the proposed process for holding a public hearing about a broadly applicable recommendation. One, labor law section 224C2 and 4 require the board to hold a public hearing before making any recommendations that apply broadly to all projects. For example, regarding the minimum threshold percentage of public funds and the dollar threshold of projects as set by law, certain construction work excluded as a covered project, the definition of construction for purposes of section 224A of the labor law, and particular instances of benefits, monies, or credits as to whether or not they should constitute public funds. At any meeting of the board member may request that a hearing be held regarding any issue or issues under the board's purview. The chair will call for a vote, and if the majority of the board agrees, a hearing will be held on the matter. If a hearing is to be held, the board members will provide availability to the secretary, and hearing will be scheduled in accordance with the open meetings law and labor law section 224C, notice requirements of any public hearing. Each member will be given an opportunity to make requests for documentation and testimony to be secured for the hearing. Any request for testimony or documents shall be issued by the chair on behalf of the board. The secretary will assist the chair in drafting such requests. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. An agenda shall be posted at least 24 hours in advance, and this is where there's a proposal by James Whalen to make it 48 hours in advance.
So let's pause there. Do you have comments about that?
I mean, 24 hours was selected because it's from the open meetings law, it's the requirement. And just from experience, the agendas sometimes can be in flux even within that 48 to 24 hour in advance period. which is why we went 24 in the first place. That was the logic behind that.
So it's in the public meetings law already.
Right.
Yeah. So can we keep it at the 24? Understanding that we have it in advance, we do it as soon as we can, but no later than 24 hours. Is that
Okay.
Yes.
okay? Thank you.
Secretary will introduce the matter and provide and introduce copies of any documentation to the board and to the record. The chair will call witnesses that are present to testify. The chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to question each witness. Members of the public may be given the opportunity to speak on the record with a time limit determined by the chair at the hearing, or provide written testimony, or both. All written testimony must be submitted at least 48 hours in advance of the hearing. There are two proposals here, one by Hope Knight to limit the public to 2 minutes each, and one by James Whalen to remove the 48 hours in advance requirement. When it comes to it can be limited on a case by case to 2 minutes. It was left as the chair's determination because sometimes, based on the subject matter of the hearing, it could be warranted to change that time. And as for the 48 hours in advance, if we have documents, potential letters, documentation, things being submitted right up to the moment of the hearing, it doesn't really allow for time to get copies to all the board members, everybody to read and consider it before the hearing starts. So that's the reason behind why that was proposed.
So this is really up to the board. There's nothing in law that dictates it one way or the other. I will say that in hearings that we've held at the Department of Labor, the tendency on the length of time of testimony has been 2 to 3 minutes. Occasionally, we have moved it, if somebody has a longer testimony that we think is critical, we can always extend the speaking limit if necessary, but I really support 2 to 3 minutes. I think that's adequate. It's actually quite a amount of time. And the written testimony, the 48 hours in advance really is to help the board members and also allow us to post it if it needs to be public. So that was our thinking, but this is totally up to the board. There's no law around it.
Well, I'll just say this. I agree with Hope's putting a time limit. I know the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey, we do 3 minutes. And we stick pretty much 2 to 3 minutes. They get a warning or notification after 2 minutes. Very rarely do we extend it, because if you have a number of people, you could wind up, you get 10 people, and if people are going on, you'd have 2 more hours in the public. So, I mean, if you're gonna say 2 to 3 minutes, I would just say, if it's all right with you, 3 minutes. Because I mean, and that's what we do at the Port Authority in New York, New Jersey. That's it, 3 minutes.
Okay. Is that all right with everybody? We can do a 2-minute warning. That's easy.
And
Yeah,
2 minutes, you get notified, 2 minutes, you got 60 seconds left.
Yes.
That's it.
My kind of chair, Gary. And for the 48 hours, that really is so we can post it publicly and give the board members time to consider. That's the main reason we've asked for that. So is that all right with everybody, or Jim, you want to speak to it?
So, I mean, what happens if relevant, compelling testimony comes in 24 hours before?
So I'm going to look at my legal counsel here for a second. Is there?
You can soften and say should be submitted or strive to be submitted.
Yeah, we could soften this to be submitted or strive to be submitted to give us the leeway to accept something that comes in 48 hours.
I'm fine with that flexibility.
Okay, great, thank you. 48 or strive to be within 48 hours.
At the conclusion of the questioning and public comments, the chair and each board member will be given an opportunity to make a statement or comments regarding their observations and conclusions, or ask each other questions, or both. The chair will then call for a vote to determine if the board is ready to close the hearing or adjourn for additional fact-finding. If the matter is adjourned for additional fact-finding, then any additional documentation or testimony sought by the board members will be requested by the secretary in order to complete the hearing at a future date. The hearing is closed and the secretary will reduce the board's recommendation to a writing and distribute to the board members to review within 7 days. Public meeting will be scheduled within 3 weeks in accordance with all proper notice requirements required by law to vote whether to adopt the written recommendations as the board's final recommendation. And it was proposed by James Whalen to add that it reads within 3 weeks of the close of the hearing, that the hearing would be held. I guess
Just to clarify what the
We
3
can
weeks,
clarify.
yeah,
no problem clarifying that.
without objection, I think that's clear, okay.
The Commissioner of Labor has the authority to adopt the board's final recommendation as a rule or regulation pursuant to section 224A 8E of the labor law. And there was a proposal by James Whalen that it reads, the Commissioner of Labor has the authority to adopt or reject within that language.
And, you know, we actually think this is just logical. I have to say, as a chair, I find it very hard to imagine a circumstance where I would overrule the board that way, but it's, you know, just laid out there and everybody knows the stakes. So without objection? All righty. So Sean,
So in summary, the just changes to this section we discussed would be to make so that all written testimony should be submitted at least 48 hours in advance of the hearing to ensure that it can be considered. To change the time limit to 2 to 3 minutes instead of open-ended. To add the language of close the hearing to section 6, and the word or reject to section 7. So for this, since the board had adopted this at the last meeting, we would have that motion to vote to reopen it, and then we could vote to make the change.
so if there's no further discussion,
I guess the only discussion I would add is if the commissioner was to reject it, there should be some rationale behind it. We should be
informed of it,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. That makes sense. So the language would be accept or reject with opinion to the board. If rejected, and you don't have to know why I accepted it.
Because you agreed with them.
Just crazy, I guess.
Right, so if we get a written explanation as to why would be provided to
Yeah.
the board.
That's good. Any other discussion? Okay, I move that we reopen the procedure and adopt it consistent with our discussions in this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor of the proposed process for holding a public hearing about a broadly applicable recommendation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Unanimity is a beautiful thing. Thank you very much. So, Sean is going to circulate a clean copy of the procedures that we adopted today to all of the board members. Great work, really great work. This brings us to the end of our scheduled agenda. And before this board goes to executive session, is there anything else the board would like to discuss in the open meeting? We've noted, Jim, your ask for the next meeting. We'll be doing that. Anything else anybody wants to bring forward? Okay. So before we move to our executive session, I'd like to take this moment to remind everybody that this body will be holding meetings on the last Wednesday of each quarter throughout 2023 and 24, except during the holiday season in December. The next meeting is scheduled for September 27th, 2023. During the next portion of our agenda, the board will be discussing a specific project that the board received prior to today. Consistent with our recently adopted procedure and the confidentiality requirements set forth in Labor Law Section 224C5, I move that the board enter into executive session. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much. This is approved. We're going to go into executive session. We will now be ending the live stream and closing the doors to the public to enter the executive session. When the executive session has been adjourned, we will reopen the meeting rooms to the public. I'd like to welcome back any members of the public who are attending today's meeting. A project was presented to the board in executive session, and the board unanimously decided it was not covered. So we have now concluded discussing today's agenda items. I want to thank the members of this board for their continued service to the state of New York. Materials, including a recording of today's meeting, will be posted on the boards and committees section of the Department of Labor's website. And as we've reached the conclusion of today's meeting, I move that we adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay, not voting. The motion to adjourn is approved. This concludes the meeting today. Thank you all for really good work. And I really appreciate your service, and I know that we will be getting back to you with the clean copy and then the proposed material for the next session about public law, et cetera, and whatever we're going to do in September. I really do thank you. This has really been great.
Thank you to you and your team.
Yes,
Thank you.